Okay, we are back looking at Revelation 17, and I will confess, working through this was probably one of the hardest chapters in the book of Revelation. There are so many different angles on it, and I, having looked at a few different things, there's so many different takes on this passage of how to interpret it. So I'm going to kind of we'll kind of go through and try to make sure we get what we know to be true. And then we can argue about the details of it and haggle about some of those things. So there's some themes that are absolute truth here that are clear. And then there are some other details regarding the beast and the prostitute that might be a little tricky. And we'll kind of pose some possibilities of what they could mean. And we'll see where it goes. So let's get started. So Revelation 17, it begins with this phrase, then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and said to him, come, I'll show you the judgment of the great prostitute, clearly connecting this section here with the seven bowls that we just read. So it would be good for us to just kind of briefly go over those bowls and what was involved in each of them. So why don't we do this? And we're just going to read the seven bowls just to refresh our memories of them. So Bob Thomas, would you start us off? This is Revelation 16, just verse 2.
Just verse 2? Okay.
Yeah.
So the first angel went and poured out his bowl on the earth, and harmful and painful swords came upon the people who bore the mark of the beast and worshipped its image.
Okay. Carol, would you read verse 3?
The second angel poured out his bowl into the sea, and it became like the blood of a corpse, and every living thing died that was in the sea.
Okay. And Claudette, if you would read verses 4, 5, 6, and 7. How about that? 4 to 7.
Okay. The third angel poured out his bowl into the rivers and the springs of water, and they became blood. And I heard the angel in charge of the waters say, just are you, O Holy One, who is and who was, for you brought these judgments. For they have shed the blood of saints and prophets, and you have given them blood to drink. It is what they deserve. And I heard the altar saying, yes, Lord God the Almighty, true and just are your judgments.
Okay. And then Rob Roy, if you would read verse 8 and 9.
The fourth angel poured out his bowl on the sun, and it was allowed to scorch people with fire. They were scorched by the fierce heat, and they cursed the name of God who had the power over these plagues. They did not repent and give him glory.
Yeah. So the first four, just like we saw with the first four seals, the first four trumpets, they seem to be targeting the different parts of creation here. We start with the first angel's bowl is poured out where in the verse 2?
On the earth.
On the earth. The second angel pours out his bowl
Into the sea.
into the sea. The third, his focus,
Rivers and springs of water.
rivers and the springs of water. And then the fourth
On the
is
throne of the beast. No, excuse me, on the sun.
on the sun. So you see those kind of elements of creation, the earth, the sea, the salty waters, the fresh waters, and then the sun, all these elements of essential elements of creation. God's wrath is being poured out on them, but the focus is in these wrath, you'll notice, is really targeted on those who bore the mark of the beast. Everything in the sea died. And remember, the sea was this, what comes out of the sea? What's
Evil.
evil? Yeah, the sea, that's where the chaos, the evil, the darkness. When he pours it on the springs of water, they become blood, but he's very clear, who is it that's getting what they deserve? In verse 6. you can
Those
see-
who shed the blood of the saints and the prophets.
Yeah, those who shed the blood of saints and prophets are getting what they deserve. That's why the altar sings back, trust, just, and true are your judgments, because that's where the saints were who had been slain. And then the fourth, pouring on the sun, again, it scorches people and they curse God, and they did not repent and give him glory. So these are not generic judgments on everybody in the earth. It's very targeted and very specific.
Mm.
This is the wrath of God on those who have his enemies, those who've been oppressing him, his people. So we'll pick it up now, the next one, 10 and 11. Sharon, would you get that for us, verse 10 and 11?
The fifth angel poured out his bowl on the throne of the beast, and its kingdom was plunged into darkness. People gnawed their tongues in anguish and cursed the God of heaven for their pain and sores. They did not repent of their deeds.
Right. And then Bob Fowler, if you would get the sixth angel, 12 down to 16.
The sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up to prepare the way for the kings of the east. And I saw coming out of the mouth of the dragon, and out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet, 3 unclean spirits like frogs. For they were demonic spirits performing signs, who go abroad to the kings of the whole earth to assemble them for battle on the great day of God the Almighty. Behold, I am coming like a thief. Blessed is the one who stays awake, keeping his garments on, that he may not go about naked and be seen exposed. And they assembled them at the place that in Hebrew is called Armageddon.
Now focus is now in these last couple of passages here. I would argue you'll notice the turn into the spiritual realms here, the throne of the beast, and his kingdom plunged into darkness. And then in the sixth angel, it does mention the Euphrates drying up and allowing the kings of the east, but it speaks about the dragon again and the mouth of the beast and the false prophet and all these unclean spirits. You're seeing the demonic realms here are also under judgment. The judgment is not just on the physical realm. The judgment is upon ultimately the spiritual realm. You remember what Jesus says about hell in Matthew, was it 25, where he talks about the sheep and the goats, and he says, those who are cursed of the father, the goats, he says, they will be sent into everlasting fire, prepared for whom, though? Do you remember?
Devil and his angels.
The devil and his angels. So that the hell, that judgment, the wrath is ultimately, it's for the devil and his angels. It's a spiritual judgment here, but it includes those who are of the devil, of this physical realm. So it's, again, it's not, that's why that picture of hell, where the devil is the tormentor and he's the one punishing people in hell. I'm like, no, that's, he's being punished there, and his beast and all of his minions are being punished there. All right, now the seventh.
Oops,
Yeah, please.
sorry. Do you think there's any significance in verse 12 where it says to prepare the way for the kings from the east? Because doesn't Christ come from the east?
So the east, I think we talked about last time. In the scriptures, the east is the direction that people are sent away from God when they're cursed. They go to the east. It's where Babylon was settled, in the east. It's where Cain, when he leaves, he goes east of Eden. Everything is moving. East is away, west is toward the Lord. The temple, if you remember, was set against the western wall in the temple courts. And so you enter from the east, and there is no western gate, because that's where the Lord dwells, in the west here. And then things go toward the east is where the rebellion goes. And so now you have these barbarians from the east. It's symbolic, it's not geographic. It's not as if people from the east are barbarians, but at that time they actually were. But you have that symbolism there, and that's why, like, the wise men coming from the east is a pretty big deal. It's not just coincidence that he just mentions, oh, they're from the east. That means something. They are coming from far away from God, and they're coming back to him now. So, and Abraham, if you remember, begins his journey out in the east in Ur, and he's brought into the promised land toward the west. But in this case here, so we have this whole setup and they're battling, and that Armageddon, we talked last time about it. It's the Armageddon is very interesting because it's this, there is no place called Armageddon. It's Ar means the mountain of Megiddo, but as you know, Megiddo was not a mountain, it was a plain where these great battles were fought. So that calling it Armageddon emphasizes the heights of this. This is a cosmic spiritual battle that is happening here. So it's not, we're not looking for a specific location on earth where this takes place. That seventh bowl now comes and pours out into the air. So let's pick it up there. Jack, would you read the last part, 17 to 21?
The seventh angel poured out his bowl into the air, and a loud voice came out of the temple from the throne saying, "It is done." And there was flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder, and a great earthquake, such as there have never been since man was on the earth. So great was that earthquake. The great city was split into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell. And God remembered Babylon the Great to make her drain the cup of wine of the fury of his wrath. And every island fled away, and no mountains were to be found. And great hailstones, about 100 pounds each, fell from heaven on people. And they cursed God for the plague of the hail, because the plague was so severe.
Yeah, this is, now it's done. The last bowl is poured out. You'll notice where it's poured out is into the air.
Yeah.
If you can remember the significance of the air.
The heavens.
Yeah, if you remember, this is the devil is called the prince of the power of the air. This is his kingdom now. The focus is on that spiritual realm that is in rebellion to God, being poured out. You'll notice how all of it. The first 4, the wrath is being poured upon the physical creation. The last 3, the target seems to be in the spiritual realms here, and particularly culminating in the defeat of the devil himself. And you're going to see that as the chapters go on, where he retells this in the fall of Babylon, and then the fall of the beast, and then the dragon himself will be taken out. And so you have this order of events in which these happen. And we have all these judgments. A lot of the judgments, if you recall last time too, are reminiscent of the Exodus, the hailstones, the darkness, the plagues, all those things that even the frogs that are mentioned there, very reminiscent of the days of Moses, bringing them out of Egypt and judging the gods of Egypt along with Egypt itself. So that's where we left off. And now we're going to continue in chapter 17 now. One of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls. So now we have a little bit of an exposition going to tell us a little bit more about this story. So it's not so much, it's another way of kind of retelling some of these things in a different way. And so he unfolds a little bit of a parable for us here, a visual parable for John to see and for us to ponder. There's a mystery to it. There's some things that are going to be clear about it, and then where you get unclear is the exact application of it. Was this something that John was dealing with at this time? Was it something that the church would soon be dealing with? Or was it something that is going to be in the very last days that is a long way away from them, but maybe closer to us? So, or is it something that just sort of applies in a timeless sort of manner here? So there's so many different takes on this. This is why Revelation is a tough book to go through. But let's take a look and see what we can figure out. So Teresa, if you wouldn't mind, would you do the honors? And chapter 17, verses 1 to 6. You're muted there, Teresa. For some reason.
A little bigger, please.
How's that?
Thank you. Much better. Then one of the 7 angels with 7 bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute who was seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality. and with the wine of those whose sexual immoralities the dwellers on earth have become a drunk. And he carried me away into the spirit, into the wilderness. And I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman who was arrayed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup of abominations and the impurities of her sexual immorality. And on her forehead was written a name of mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes of earth's abominations. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of saints, the blood of the martyrs of Jesus.
Okay, thank you. All right, so let's get the scene here. We don't know yet who is who here. Some of the characters we have seen before, but we're also introduced to, I believe, a new character here that we really haven't seen, called this great prostitute. So let's go through. First off, who are the characters mentioned in these few verses? We start with the great prostitute. Who else is mentioned here?
Kings,
Excuse me?
kings,
Kings, yes, kings of the earth.
the spirit,
Okay, he carried me away in the spirit. So we're gonna skip that part because no, that's fine. They carried away in the spirit into the wilderness. Okay, good. Keep going.
Scarlet beast.
There's a scarlet beast. Okay. And I think that's, well, there's one more, I guess. What was that? The dwellers on earth. Where's that?
Verse 2, second
Verse
half.
2. Oh, okay. Have become drunk. Yeah, sure. Well, the kings of the earth and the dwellers on earth. And then we have at the end, we have a mention of the saints and the martyrs here. Okay. So some of these are pretty easy to figure out. The kings of the earth, the dwellers on earth, the saints and martyrs. I think we kind of get those. We have here the beast mentioned again. And then we have this great prostitute, and that's going to be the challenge. We've already encountered the beast. What or who is the beast? What is that?
The enemies of God's people, historically.
Yeah, these are the enemies of God's people, and more specifically, these are the kingdoms that are persecuting God's people. They're referenced as beasts. In Daniel's day, he has that vision of the 4 beasts, and each of those kingdoms at different times and places persecuted God's people. So, for example, in the Babylonians were the ones, they are like the lion, the beast of a lion who destroyed Jerusalem and took the Jews into captivity. And several occasions in the book of Daniel, you see Nebuchadnezzar forcing them to worship idols, and Daniel and his friends withstanding that and even willing to go to death for it. So there's this beastly way, and Nebuchadnezzar is even turned into a beast, if you remember, for 7 years. And then they're taken over by the Persians. And the Persians, there was a time under the Persians when God's people were being persecuted and greatly afflicted. Do you remember when that was? Famous story under the Persians. I should know this one.
Say it again, Pastor.
So which story details the great persecution by the Persians, or that failed, but that was attempted
Esther?
against people? That's Esther, if you remember. Haman, he's determined to cast lots and set a date when all the Jews would be killed. And by Esther's intervention, they are saved. And so Persia is a beast. They're described as a bear as they're trying to devour God's people. And then the Greeks, too. There's a famous story, the story of Hanukkah details the great persecution under the Greeks. Do you remember who it was that wanted to wipe out the Jews under the Greeks?
Antiochus Epiphanes.
Yeah, Antiochus Epiphanes, who even goes into the temple and sacrifices a pig to Zeus in the temple. What an abomination he was. And that led to the Maccabean revolts and to the miracle of Hanukkah and to the freedom of Israel for a time. And now we have the fourth beast. The Greeks, they were a leopard, but now the fourth beast, according to Daniel, is a terrifying beast. It's undescribable. And of course, this is the fourth kingdom now that they're under, which is the Romans. And they didn't have just one time of persecution. They had multiple times of persecution under the Romans. So, but that beast is not one particular kingdom, necessarily empire. It's any time that a governing, ruling power uses its power to oppress and afflict God's people. That's the beast. And you see him alive. The beast is alive today, and it's been alive throughout history. It just takes different shapes and forms. And that's why you'll see in Revelation, it's a mixture of, remember this beast has looks like a lion, a leopard, a bear, all of them kind of put together. And because it's not one particular thing. And so it's a very important concept, but here it's described as a scarlet beast. You got that phrase there. When you read this here, this paragraph will help you understand why this beast, which is the same beast in chapter 13. In chapter 13, there was a beast, if you remember, had 7 heads, 10 horns, blasphemous names. But this beast is I would say it's the same beast, except it's described now as scarlet. What do you think the significance of scarlet is? When you look at this paragraph again, there
I
are
always
two
think of
things.
it as immorality.
Immorality, okay? How does scarlet relate to immorality? Okay, that's gonna be a question for us. You're on the path here because it talks about the wine of those whose sexual immorality of the dwellers. So there is a scarlet. What color is scarlet?
Red.
Crimson red.
It's red. So what in this paragraph is red?
Blood.
Blood of the
Blood.
saints.
Yeah. There's 2 reds going on in this paragraph, you'll notice. There's the blood of the saints and the blood of the martyrs. That's what makes this beast red in the blood of those he's been devouring and persecuting. But also there is the red wine as well of sexual immorality, but he doesn't describe it as a red beast. He describes it as a scarlet beast. Why do you think that is?
If I had said something earlier, but I don't know if you heard me because I might have been muted.
Yeah.
The Red Quarter in Jerusalem was where prostitutes hung out. And so when I first read this and saw him talk about the harlot in the Old Testament, when he would talk about harlotry and prostitution, he was talking about religious idolatry. And so that's kind of where I was thinking that this was going.
I think you're spot on with that too. I think he's weaving together. Actually, I'll change my mind on this. 3 themes in the word scarlet. One is absolutely right, the sexual immorality. Today we call it the red light district, the prostitutes, the adulteries, and so forth like that. That goes along with the wine, the drunkenness, the redness of it, right? And the second part is the blood of the martyrs, sacrificing that oppression, the shedding of blood. But again, he doesn't describe him simply as red. He says scarlet. He could have just said red, but he says scarlet. And
That's
the
more
word,
poetic.
well, there's a reason, because in this paragraph, the word scarlet is used not just once, it's used twice. You see where it
She's
is?
scarlet, the beast is scarlet, and she's arrayed in purple and scarlet.
She is arrayed in purple and scarlet. So what's the significance of scarlet there? What does it mean to be arrayed in purple and scarlet?
Sounds to me like a leader of some type.
She's wealthy.
Yes, wealthy. Look, that's wealthy clothing right there. The red and the purple, the scarlet. In fact, the Romans, I believe, their high officials would be dressed in this kind of clothing, purple and scarlet, if you were a very important position. But this is the clothing of luxury too, adorned with gold and jewels and pearls. So the scarlet, I would say, carries along three themes here of the sexual morality of this prostitute and beast, the luxury and wealth, and the persecution that brings it about. You know what it reminds me of? In the book Pilgrim's Progress, where is the one place you see a Christian being martyred in Pilgrim's Progress?
Vanity Fair.
Vanity Fair. That's where it happens. The place of self-indulgence and luxury is exactly the place where the Christians are martyred and their blood is shed. That seems to be the main place you see it. It's not in the places of, of just poverty and despair. It's in places of luxury and indulgence that you see Christians being martyred and thrown to the beasts, so to speak. And in fact, you see that today. Who is it that's giving Christians the most grief in America today? Where are you seeing this? Right now, they're arguing a bill for, was it the defense, is the marriage thing? Marriage Act, right? And the biggest threat to religious freedom is coming from the homosexual community, homosexual marriage. And homosexuality is an interesting sin. It is truly, if you look at the history of the world, it is the sin of luxury. It is the kind of sexual immorality that nations that have overabundance and luxury commit these things. You don't see it. You see it at the end of Rome and Greece. You see it in these great empires when they've reached the height of pleasures. They always go into this at that point. You don't see it in poor third world places. You see it in wealthy places, which is why they have so much power too, because they have so much money here. But in any case, we digress for a moment here. So we're going to kind of play through this so you can see whoever the woman is. We don't know just yet. The angel's going to interpret more for us and we can start talking about it then. But for now, what we see here is this great prostitute, someone who is wealthy, luxurious, in the lap of luxury, but is also self-indulgent with sexual morality and becoming in drunkenness and all those indulgences, and someone who is also persecuting the church and killing Christians. That's what we're seeing here. And that woman, whoever that woman is sitting on the scarlet beast. What does that mean here? That the woman is sitting on a scarlet beast? Any thoughts on
She's
that?
going along for the ride.
She's along for the ride, right? She's someone, we're going to find out she is not the beast. She is someone separate from the beast, but she is riding the beast, and she is whether sitting over the beast or is simply aligned with the beast, but she is certainly doing the beast's work and going along with him.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Considering the definition of prostitute, why do you think they're using the metaphor of a prostitute here?
Great question. That is a biblical metaphor, isn't it? You know, and I think let's get into that a little bit. We can see who was likened to a prostitute in the Old Testament.
Israel.
Israel.
Israel is, isn't it? If you look at
Religious idolatry.
yeah, let's look at Ezekiel 16, for example. He describes her as, this is the Lord's faithless bride. And he takes her out and dresses her up in gold and jewels, and she goes off and she commits adultery with all these others. And at one point, I can't remember if it's here or another passage, he says, you're worse than a prostitute. Do you remember how she was worse than a prostitute?
She doesn't blush.
She doesn't blush. But she actually pays the men. I mean, at least the prostitute gets paid for it. She's so lewd and depraved. She actually pays the men to defile her. And so she goes off and referring to all of her going after the other gods, going after other nations, seeking their favor and pleasure, and rejecting the Lord. In Ezekiel 16, Ezekiel 23 is another one.
Isn't Hosea, is he the one who had to marry a prostitute who just kept going after guys?
Yeah, yeah.
Gomer.
Yeah. That's the miserable part of being a prostitute, is you have to play out the message sometimes. And Hosea marries a wife of prostitution in order to show Israel, Judah, that this is how the Lord feels about you. You are his faithless bride. So that right there should give you some clues, if you know your Bible, that when we're getting into the prostitute, is this prostitute, very well, could it be Israel? God's people here.
I always understood the adulteress, because the adulteress was turning away from God, she was the bride of God as Israel, and turning away from God and kind of cheating on him.
Yeah.
But the prostitute, I don't get the metaphor of the present day prostitute and how that is likened to the betrayal. I don't see a prostitute as an adulteress, because a prostitute isn't committed to a union that she's betraying. So that's why I'm having a hard time with.
Well, it's both. This is what makes it so abominable. So imagine, for us men here, imagine that you were married to a woman and it wasn't just that she was cheating on you, but that she was prostituting herself. Okay, so it's that bad. That's what he's saying. Because if it was just her adultery, it would be like her going after, I'm going to go and worship Baal and not you, Yahweh, and I'm going to give my heart to him, and I'm going to commit adultery with Baal.
Right.
He describes her, she's really a prostitute, and she's going after all the gods, all of them. She's going after, it's loose and lewd, and there's not even goodness, you have those stupid movies like The Bridges of Madison County that portray an adulterous affair as a love story. Because it's a relationship, but there's no relationship here. This is just lewd, exchanging things, and that's exactly how the gods dealt with things. It was just a quid pro quo, an exchange of worship me, I'll give you something, and if they don't, go somebody else.
I mean, isn't the point of what prostitution is they sell themselves for money? So they're basically they're idolizing money in the sense that they're selling themselves for the worship of money.
Yeah. It's not just sexual immorality, but you're right. It's greed also mixed in with it. Whereas adultery, there's a seduction to it, and whereas prostitution, it's pure, just greed and selfishness. There's no relationship there. It's just an exchange. And that's exactly how Israel was dealing with the Lord, and he hands them over, which is what led to their judgment. Now he speaks about this great prostitute seated on this scarlet beast, and I'm going to talk in a little bit further about, try to get a little more specific on it.
At the same time, she's seated over the waters, the many waters.
Yes.
So she's seated on the beast and many waters.
So we're going to find out what that means. Who is seated on many waters? So great prostitute, she's seated on many waters. We're going to try to figure out what that means in a second. The angel's going to explain in a minute what some of these figures mean. So we'll get to those next, and we'll come back to it. So,
Okay.
all right, let's pick it up here. Verses the next paragraph 7 down to 14. Nancy, if you'd read that for us,
Starting with 14.
starting with
Yes,
7,
7.
when I saw her.
Okay. When I saw her, I marveled greatly, but the angel said to me, "Why do you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast with the 7 heads and 10 horns that carries her. The beast that you saw was and is not and is about to rise from the bottomless pit and go into destruction. And the dwellers on earth whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world will marvel to see the beast, because it was and is not and is to come. This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. They are also 7 kings, 5 of whom have fallen. One is, the other has not yet come, and when he does come, he must remain only a little while. As for the beast that was and is not, it is an 8th, but it belongs to the 7, and it goes to destruction. And the 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received royal power, but they are to receive authority as kings for 1 hour together with the beast. These are of one mind, and they hand over their power and authority to the beast. They will make war on the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them. He is Lord of lords and King of kings, and those with him are called the chosen and faithful.
Great, thank you. So John sees this scene of this prostitute riding on the scarlet beast, and she's drunk on the blood of the saints and the martyrs, and he marvels at this. And the angel replies saying, "Why do you marvel? I'll tell you now the mystery of what this is, what this means." And he speaks about the beast. Now, we've met the beast before, and here he says in verse 8, "The beast that you saw was and is not and is about to rise from the bottomless pit and go to destruction." Now, that sentence there, let's break that down a little bit here. What does that mean here, that the beast that you saw was and is not?
Is it paralleling basically God who was, is, and will be?
You are correct in that regard. There is this, you see where the beast often mimics the way of the Lamb who dies and then rises again, and you see the beast in his own way sort of doing that. But you can see here that to say that the beast was implies that, okay, there's a beast who in the past was what? What
Was in power.
Was in power, right? So this beast was in power and active. But now in the present, he says, what's going on in the present?
Well, he's
Jesus
not.
took the power.
He's about to rise from the bottomless pit and
Yeah,
go to
and-
construction.
Yeah, and so in the past he was active in power, and now at the moment is not. So there's like a lull here. He is not. Remember, the beast is not one particular thing. It's that whole spirit of, and it comes in different forms. So you see, for example, we could speak, if you're in the times of Persia, in the time of Esther, you might say that beast was in the Babylonians, but right now it's not. It's Cyrus has taken over, we're at peace, but he's coming again because Haman's coming. And he's going to rise up, and of course Haman's story ends with his being destroyed too. So you have this kind of back and forth where the beast was, but now he's not, but he is about to rise. So from John's perspective here, to say that he's about to rise speaks about a very near future for him. He's about to rise again. From that bottomless pits, that's where the devil dwells and comes forth, this evil coming out of this place. But then once he rises, what's going to happen to him?
He goes to destruction.
He goes to destruction. So there's this kind of back and forth in dealing with this evil. The evil rises, it's sort of suppressed, it rises again, and then goes to destruction. And you see that kind of pattern. You're going to see that where it's throughout the Old Testament, that sort of pattern.
I
And
thought though that when John was writing this, that they were under persecution then, right? But you're saying he is not in power? I mean, there is not Antichrist
so
persecuting the Christians at that time?
The challenge we have right now is, when did John write this? Is this real debate about when. We don't know exactly when he wrote it. There's some who say that he wrote it in the 90s during the time of Domitian, which was a time of persecution. And then others say that he wrote it in the 60s or in the late 60s during the time of Nero, or right after Nero died. So for example, if he's thinking about Nero, if he wrote this in 69, then Nero has just died in 68. And for a year or so, the persecution of the Christians has not yet, is kind of at peace for now. But it's going to rise again. Vespasian's coming in 70 AD is going to destroy Jerusalem. Domitian's coming in the 90s, so it's going to rise again, but for a moment. So if he wrote it after Nero's death, then the sense is that perhaps he's thinking of that. This is why this is really hard to figure out. But I want to catch the patterns here, where you see this happening, where there are these movements where the evil rises its ugly head and the oppression begins, and you fall into despair. And then the Lord brings you some level of deliverance from this. And you think, oh, we're free, but then it rises again, oh no. And so John is kind of setting some expectations of here that this is not done yet. Even if we see this fall in our lifetime, it's going to rise again before it goes to destruction. But it will go to destruction. Don't be afraid. It will. Okay. So not only does the beast go to destruction, but who else goes to destruction?
The harlot.
Others on the earth whose names were not written in the book of life
Yeah.
for the foundation of the world.
Yeah. So he mentions now the dwellers who have not been written in the book of life. And they will marvel to see the beast, because it was and is not and is to come. So they'll marvel at this resurgence. This is actually, if I want to show you something here on my on the notes I sent you earlier. I had a little extra things in there for you to take a look at. Hang on a second. I need to find them one more time here. Where are they? Oh, shoot. Do you have your notes with you?
Yeah.
I do.
One's from, today, chapter 17.
Yes, I have a list of like emperors, and let me find it real quick. I'll pull it up for people to see here.
Oh, I've got it.
Okay.
You
I
mean
forget-
12 Caesars,
at the
you mean?
bottom of the map.
Yeah, the 12 Caesars. Let me show you this here. A couple things. So just to get a feel for the turmoil at that time, things were. Remember, John is writing this to people in that time period, and whether it's in the 70s, the 60s, or in the 90s, I kind of leaning toward the 60s with this, because you can see here the 12 Caesars of Rome. Did everyone see that? So you can see that the pattern of persecution you've got from the very beginning. As soon as Christ appears, during the time of Augustus, you have King Herod slaughtering the boys of Bethlehem. During Tiberius, you've got Herod Antipas beheading John the Baptist, Pontius Pilate crucifying Jesus, Saul persecuting the Christians. Funny thing is, Caligula, who's the one we make movies about, this depraved emperor, actually wasn't too bad with the Christians, but Claudius expelled them from Rome. And then ultimately the real first to really comes with such violence and terror is Nero. And he's the one who kills Peter and Paul. Both of them died, crucified and beheaded under Nero. He's a very significant figure here. So when he says, there were 5 who have fallen, and then 1 is, if you go with the 12 Caesars of Rome thing here, you've got these 5 have fallen, and then the 1 is Nero, is the 6th. But then look after Nero here. 69 AD is called the year of the 4 emperors, because you've got Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and Vespasian, those 4 emperors in that 1 year, 69 AD. Such turmoil. He takes the throne, Galba takes the throne after Nero kills himself, and he is assassinated. Otho takes over for 3 months, he's assassinated. Vitellius takes over for 8 months, he's assassinated. Until finally Vespasian comes, and he was one of the greatest emperors and restores the dignity of Rome, which causes people to marvel. The glory of Rome is returned under Vespasian, and it's under Vespasian in 70 AD that Jerusalem is destroyed and the temple burned to the ground. But the last Caesar is also a baddie. In Domitian, he comes. In Titus, you have a little bit of a reprieve, and then the persecution of Domitian happens in 89 to 96, which is another heavy persecution of Christians. So there seems to be 2 possibilities. Either John wrote this in the 90s or he wrote it in the 60s. And there are different takes on it of why we would believe it. And
it's important to note that Irenaeus, one of the early church fathers, believed it was John wrote it when Domitian was in power.
Yes, you are correct. He did. R.C. Sproul makes an interesting point, though. He takes this passage we just read about the 5 kings have fallen. 1 is that, however you slice that, because some say you start with Julius, others say you start with Augustus, but either way, your 6th king is in the 60s. So his take is from the internal sources. He thinks it's in the 60s. But so Irenaeus is you're right. He does mention he thinks it was in the 90s. But again, Irenaeus is not scripture either. So it's not clear.
So do the 5 kings have to be from Rome? Could it not be, from other countries or nations?
Well, really, there are no other nations.
There is that take, Jack, just so you know, there's a gazillion takes on this stuff, as Pastor said, and some think it is the nation. Some think that it's Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Medo, Persia, Greek, Rome, which was the one in power when Paul says 1 is, or when John says 1 is.
Yeah.
Then there's the mysterious 7th one, and an 8th will be one of those. There's a lot of takes.
Yeah, there's so many takes on this. That's why it's like, I give up. I give up. I think that's why I think the most important thing is it doesn't really, in one sense, matter that much what your leanings are on this. And I want to stress that these are our leanings, not our convictions. None of us can really hold convictions on this because it's just not clear. And we have to be careful about that. And so we give each other leeway, whatever makes sense in this regard. But there are things that are clear, and we have to hold to those. And one is.
I'm sorry. No, I was going to say the beasts, as you define them, are opponents of Christians.
Yeah.
So whether those opponents be the historic enemies of Israel, which are these nations that I just named, or they're the 12 Caesars, they're still the opponents of the Christians.
Oh, absolutely. And this applies to us in the same way. It's like, look, you understand that the political powers of this world are not your friends. Do we know that yet? We got that down, right? That the governments of this world are not our friends. They are the beast. They comes in many fashions and forms, and don't be so surprised when they make war on us, and when they seek to martyr us, to make our lives miserable, to whatever it is. We are not part of it. This is what they do. The beast makes war on the lamb. That's how beasts operate, right? Wolves seek to devour lambs. Of course, they don't realize that there's one particular lamb who is the conquering, the king lamb, who will take them out. But that's something we got to get, and that's how John describes it, how he saw it, understood it. It's tricky. It's hard for us 2,000 years later to try to figure these things out. What I think would have been much better understood by the people at that time is hard for us this far into the future. So but it's also clear so that you have a choice to make here. Are you going to align with the beast, or are you going to align with the lamb? If you align with the beast, you will experience the pleasures of this life, the luxuries of this life. But what will be your result?
Eternal damnation.
Yeah, destruction, damnation. If you align with the lamb, what is going to happen to you in this life?
Persecution.
Persecution. You may be martyred. You're going to suffer. You're going to have trouble in this world. But you will rise and be victorious with the Lamb, because he's the Lord of Lords and King of Kings. That right there that's our conviction. All the other stuff we can haggle about.
We may suffer man's wrath, but we won't suffer God's wrath.
Exactly
Right.
right. Exactly right. You know, but you have to choose. You have to choose your trouble. You don't get around it. You don't get to escape from this. You're going to have trouble, and choose it. And John is presenting these pictures in ways that, if we're wise, we see that and say, okay, we're going to take a beating right now, but it'll be worth it to endure to the end and not to give in. Stand firm. All right, so the 7 kings, again, 5 have fallen, 1 is, the other has not yet come. And when he does come, he must remain only a little while. As for the beast that was and is not, it is an 8th, but it belongs to the 7. That's an interesting phrase. I don't know if there's any notes on that from folks. I'm trying to figure that one out myself here. But it goes to destruction. So there's this idea of the beast that was and is not. It is an 8th. And so now you have this thing of the 7 kings, 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. We read that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now that even gets tricky. Talking about 7 mountains. Which 7 mountains?
I know Rome is the city that sits on 7 hills.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are 2 options for us. There are 7 mountains of Jerusalem too.
Mm.
You know that. Here are the seven hills of Jerusalem, the mountains, Mount Zion, Mount New Zion, all these different 7 mountains here. And there, of course, there are the 7 mountains of Rome. Is he talking about one of these cities, or is he possibly talking about both? Because there is, however, one thing in common. What does Jerusalem and Rome have in common in the
They
time?
have the temple.
Well, Jerusalem has the temple. Rome doesn't have the temple.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I'm thinking of the Roman rule of Jerusalem. There was the temple. Jerusalem was there.
But
Where Rome was
Jerusalem
ruling.
and Rome have an alliance, do they not, in the first century? What is it that they have in common? You saw it about in the first paragraph of chapter 17. They do have a common interest, Jerusalem and Rome.
Oh, they're fighting against God's people.
Yeah. The blood of the martyrs, the blood of Christ, the 2 points of persecution is Jerusalem and Rome. What's the first city that persecutes Christians is Jerusalem. The book of Acts begins with the believers in Jerusalem, and by chapter 7, they're being driven out of Jerusalem. And Jerusalem becomes the headquarters of their enemies. And then it ends, the book of Acts, in Rome, which is the headquarters of the Roman Empire, where they are facing now, they're going to be facing another persecution too, through the Romans. Those are the two sources of persecution for John, are the Jews and the Romans, Jerusalem and Rome. And so that he mentions kind of 7 mountains is sort of interesting because it reminds us of both cities. Both of them were known for being built on 7 mountains. It's kind of an interesting thought here. But then he says there are also 7 kings. And then again, it's tricky here, but
Yeah, well, if Rome does get resurrected before the end, that would certainly be it was and was not and now is. That would
yeah, I mean, in one sense, that's a long way away.
can you see the I just don't know why this comes to my mind, but I think that if the what's the place called where the Pope lives in Rome?
Vatican.
If Vatican City kind of becomes this new world religion that just totally turns away from God and becomes the world religion, like, is that even possible? Like, does
I mean, it could totally be possible. I mean, the reformers all thought that the Pope was the Antichrist. You know, Martin Luther. In fact, some of the creeds, I think, some of the was it the Westminster Confession also mentioned sort of the Pope as the Antichrist in the original version of it?
Wow, really?
Yeah. They really were convinced because the main persecutor of the Reformed Protestant churches was the Catholic, you know. So it really at each time, you know, I think part of why I want to stay away from predictions is that there's so much unknowns. You really need to be flexible in your understanding of the world. And sometimes if we think it's going to work out a certain way, we kind of lose sight of what's really going on.
Yeah.
So that's
I'm not predicting that's going to happen. I just wonder if would that even be possible? Because the current Pope, he's sticking to scripture, right? Like he isn't buying into, I mean, I don't know enough about it. I don't really pay attention.
All right, Bob, any of the Bobs there? Bob Thomas, Bob Fowler, you want to talk about your Pope here? What's going on with him?
Is he like veering off from scripture? Do we know?
There are some things that they're saying that the current Pope is getting lax on.
Oh,
Gay marriage is one of them.
Which
what
one?
is one of them?
What?
Gay marriage.
Oh, is he going soft on that?
Oh,
Yeah, he's also been, I've never confirmed it, but I've heard that he's made comments that there are more ways, that Christ isn't the only way to heaven, you know, that Muslims can go to heaven.
Yeah. He seems much more progressive than past popes, I'm sure.
Accommodating to the world.
Yeah.
So then my theory can be true.
Absolutely. You can.
The other thing-
Sharon, you
I
got to
think it
write a
was-
book about it. It'll sell millions. We'll get it out there.
That's interesting because there are no shortage of views that the woman who is riding the Scarlet Beast, the woman is false religious systems.
Yeah.
There is
Yeah,
that
and so
view.
then I read the purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, and I picture the Pope in his little Pope mobile with all this ornate stuff on him, and I'm like, oh.
But for John's day, he's not thinking about the Pope.
No, I know.
Who is in John's day? Who is that religious systems here? It's quite possible he's thinking about the temple, which also is clothed in purple and scarlet and has all kinds of jewels and adornments to it as well. That's a possibility. That the temple.
As far as the 8th being one of the 7, those who believe that the 8 beast empires are the historic enemies of Israel, that's where they go. That the 8th will be one of, you know, they typically point to Rome. From somebody from the Roman, when they say he'll be back, you know, that kind of thing, that they, you know, just throw that out.
Mussolini resurrected?
No, you'd be surprised. There is one person who thinks it's Adolf Hitler, and that Nazi Germany was the 7th beast empire because they killed more Jews than anyone else of any of the beast empires, if you believe the empires were nations.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, and again, the problem is that you can, you know, go back and come up with your theories and make them work for you. There's always ways you can twist it, you can make it work.
Sure.
Calculate it the way you want it to calculate. So usually what happens is the people that write the prophecy books, they have an outcome that they want to see happen. They
Right.
have a theory, and then they just find the things that support it and emphasize those, and they disregard those that might cause it trouble. And there you go. And you got your best-selling book, and everyone's waiting for this. And they're
Well,
wrong. It's just a stack of books that are just
Yeah.
awesome. But
Those
Pastor,
are
I think you make a good point, and you have in the past, in that you can have all these, view all the views there are in these things, but if you miss the major themes, you're missing the point of the book.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Bob, you're gonna say something?
It's just that there was a big thing a while back that the new Roman Empire is the EU.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that.
Oh.
And I don't like things like that, but whatever.
It's,
Here's
yeah,
the problem too, and this is what I want to emphasize, because John has a moment of clarity, if you remember, in chapter 16. He makes an aside, but he says in regarding that seventh bowl, where do we have that seventh bowl? Let me pull up again here for a second. Where he says, but maybe the sixth bowl, where he says, "Behold, I'm coming like a thief." And so that's why it's like, I warn people, whatever your belief is of how things are going to work out, the point you have to always keep in mind is he can come at any time. He comes like a thief. He does not need to wait for some event to happen. That's why I'm not a fan of the rebuilding of the temple theory, because that's just too far off. And so you can just relax, because he's not coming until the temple's rebuilt, right? And that's going to be a while, folks. That's going to be a long time before that temple could ever get rebuilt anyway. He doesn't give us that kind of luxury where we have some signs that we can hang our hat on. It's like, no, he's coming like a thief.
But isn't Christ the temple now?
The temple is the church, is the temple. We are the temple, right? We're the body of Christ. But there are those who posit a theory that the literal temple will be rebuilt.
Okay.
And
Is
there's,
that-
yeah.
Do they come up with that from something later on in Revelation?
Well, they basically take passages that speak about that Paul talks about the lawless one appearing in the temple. And rather than saying that Paul was talking about someone at that time, they say that's referring to the end time. So therefore the temple has to be rebuilt.
Okay.
But there's nothing, but that, I think that leads you to a place of sleepiness, put it that way, where you're not really, I'm not worried about it. If the temple has to be rebuilt, then we got time. We got time.
Yeah.
when people start getting real heavy on, oh, this is the end time or that's the end time, I just look at them and say, you need to be prepared all the time, because your end time might be in your sleep tonight.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Yeah.
Did Jesus say it, that we were to be wait and aware that he could come at any time?
Exactly right. He can come anytime he wants to. Again, he can come today. There's nothing stopping him from coming today. He could wait another 1,000 years. You're absolutely right. We just have to be ready. And they felt it. They felt the urgency back in the first century about these things. And again, also keep in mind that when Jesus does give like signs of things that are going to happen, the signs that he gives are really wrapped up in the destruction of the temple that was coming in 70 AD. When he gives them specific instructions of how to deal with that great tribulation, that great trouble, time of trouble when the temple will be destroyed. Back in the Gospels, he gives them their instructions. But these ending times, exactly, how this works, that's why it's tricky here. All right. Let's see. The 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received royal power, but they are to receive authority as kings for 1 hour together with the beast. So the number 10, what's the significance of that number, the 10 kings, 10?
Completion.
It is completion. It's a fullness. So the picture is there's a unity of the world in this, all the kings of the world aligned with the beast, is that hour is coming when all the nations will hate you. That's what Jesus, didn't Jesus tell his disciples?
Yep.
That all men will hate you, that you're not going to have any friends. There are no nations that are going to protect you. All the kings will be aligned with the beast, and they are going to be of one mind and handing their power and authority to the beast. And again, that beast, remember, is not necessarily a specific person. It's a spirit. It's this power of bent on destruction and pursuing. So we could say during the time of Domitian, that was a time when all the world was aligned against the church. It happened again under Diocletian in the late 200s and early 300s. That was one of the greatest persecutions, 10 years of persecution from the Roman emperor over the church. And it was a worldwide persecution. All right, they will make war, but the point being is they will make war on the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them. For he is Lord of Lords and King of Kings. With those with him are called and chosen and faithful. That title, Lord of Lords and King of Kings. Let's talk about that a little bit here. Where did we see this before? Lord of Lords. It's a great title for us here. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. I'm going to pull up my other one. Let's see, Revelation. Here we go. So that phrase, Lord of Lords, I put a few notes on that one. Deuteronomy 10:17. It says this, for the Lord your God is God of gods and Lord of lords. Great, the mighty and awesome God, who is not partial and takes no bribe. So when Jesus is referred to as the Lord of Lords, what does that mean?
He is God.
He's God.
He's above all. He's above all.
Yeah. He's the God of gods. How about that phrase? The God of gods. What does that mean?
Everyone makes
Supreme.
up their own gods, but there's only one and he rules them all.
Yeah, the gods are the spiritual beings. The heavenly beings are called the gods. Sons of God, the angels, the cherubim, the devil, anything of the spiritual realm is called the gods. And he is the God of gods. He's the one who created the heavens and all the beings therein, and the Lord of Lords. And then he uses this phrase that Jesus is also the King of Kings. We've heard that before, because you know who's called the King of Kings? This is Daniel 2. You, O King, the King of Kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, and the might, and the glory. Who's he talking to there? Remember? Daniel chapter 2.
That's the Son of Man.
Nope. Daniel, I'm not going to show you. You should know this one. Daniel 2:37. Daniel is speaking to a person and saying, "You are the King of Kings."
Nebuchadnezzar.
Nebuchadnezzar is referred to as the King of Kings. He's the King of Kings is because Babylon is the first of the four ancient empires, where you have suddenly one king ruling over all the other kings. Before that time, you had kings battling it out against each other. Now you have Babylon, where you have him conquering. And Babylon, he conquers all the way to Egypt. He takes over Egypt too. So all these great kingdoms were fighting each other and having success and failures against each other. The Assyrians, the Egyptians, Babylonians, until Nebuchadnezzar comes and he conquers the Assyrians. He conquers Israel, he conquers Judah, he conquers Egypt, and he becomes the King of Kings.
So here we see lowercase k, King of Kings. Is that our English translation, or when Daniel wrote this, did he use lowercase for this King of Kings.
There's
in
no
whatever-
lowercase or uppercase in Hebrew or Greek.
Right.
Oh, okay.
You're just dealing with the, so.
The context.
It's interpretation. I think our Daniel 2:37 in the English Standard Version, they keep it lowercase to distinguish him from God, from the
Yeah.
true King of Kings.
Okay.
So Revelation 17, he's referred to as the Lord of Lords, like God, the God of gods, the Lord of Lords. He's the Lord of the dragon. He is the Lord of those frogs popping out of the dragon's mouth. He's the Lord of all the angelic host. And he's the King of Kings,
Hello,
the King of all the nations.
still in my Bible study. Can you
Hang
call
on a
me
second.
back in about 15? Oh, did you?
Let me get him out.
Yes, I do. But hold on.
Okay. All right. So he's the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. He's the King of Kings like Nebuchadnezzar. He's the King of the nations. He rules all the earth. So this is kind of a way of stating when Jesus says, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples. And those with him are the called and the chosen and the faithful. So, all right, we'll end it here, I think. Any last questions, comments about these 14 verses? We'll try to finish up next week. Okay. All right.